Well, let's wrap this up this evening. And my goal is I hope that you'll leave here after this session today with like a very, very clear game plan of how you can better serve and minister to the people that God has placed in your life. Like that is my goal. And I hope I can accomplish that. I have some resources I'll give out. And to introduce that, I want to talk about this book. It's called The Trellis and the Vine. I know when I did the live feed, Nathan, you talked about reading it. Nick, I know you've read it before. Maybe others have. I love this book. I read it several years ago now, but it just is very, very instrumental in painting a picture of what it means to minister. And so the title, The Trellis and the Vine, he captures kind of what the different parts of church ministry are. And he thought of this title, the one of the authors, they were sitting in their backyard and they were sitting on the porch and they looked out and they had two different trellises. And one of the trellis that they had, it had absolutely no vines growing on it, but it was beautiful. It was this amazing piece of wood, just really, really beautiful and nice and very cared for, but no vines, so no fruit. The other one was completely covered. You could hardly even see the trellis, but what it had on it was the vine was growing on it. It was bearing fruit. And if you would go up to that trellis and you'd pull back the vine and look, you'd see that the trellis needed some work. And he said, man, that is what ministry is. That is what church is. There's two different parts to this thing we call church. And one part is the trellis. That's like the kind of the structure. That's the things like the systems, the structure, the finances, all those different aspects of what we would refer to as ministry, kind of the organizational side, to hold up the vine, which is the people side. And as he was going through that and thinking through that, he said, man, like the church is definitely filled with trellis work and it's filled with vine work. However, it seems like we can often put so much of our time working on the trellis at the neglect of the vine. But my hope is that when we leave here today, we will be able to understand that trellis work is necessary, but it's only with the intended goal in order to bear more fruit in all of our lives. So hopefully it can communicate that very, very clear today. But in order to do that, there are a few mind shifts that we need to have. A few different paradigm shifts that we need to have. A few different ways we need to think about things in a different light. The first one is what I'd refer to as a ministry mind shift, or how we view church mind shift. And to continue to build on to this example, since most of our focus really needs to be focused on the vine, and there's necessary trellis work that does need to be done, but it needs to be done with the vine in mind, with bearing fruit in people's lives. And we must have a mind shift that needs to take place if we are going to be a church that disciples the nations, or play our role in that. But here's the thing though, right? Let's just be honest. Trellis work is way easier, isn't it? Like, it's so much easier. It's so much easier to work on the trellis, right? Like if you're typing up a job description, which is necessary, we need to do that. But when you're typing up a job description, that job description doesn't get mad at you, does it? Doesn't start like yelling back at you and start judging your motives and saying that you did it. Like job descriptions don't do that. Like when you're handling the budget doesn't leave you and call you names on the way out, right? Like it's there. That stuff is easy. The hard work, which is the real work, which is the necessary work, is the vine work. Like that's the same thing for those of us that are parents, right? Like the kind of the task stuff, like in getting them through the day, and this is what time we eat, this is when we go to school, this is when we do this. That's the easy stuff. The hard stuff is how to handle them when they're exerting their will against you. The hard stuff is when they sin against their brother, right? The hard stuff is when they go wayward. That's the harder part, to have those necessary conversations. Same thing in ministry. Trellis work is so much easier. That's why it's so much easier to spend so much of our time on that. I mean, think of this. What is an easier discussion to have? To sit down with a group of people and to discuss what chairs we need to buy? Or to go have a conversation with someone that you know you need to go talk to and confront them about their sin? Which one of those is easier conversation, right? Chairs, yeah, give me chairs. Which is so funny that churches can fight over that, though. Like, I don't stinking care. Buy a chair someone can sit in. That's like that's it. Let someone else make the decision. That's easier. So the other thing of why it's so much easier to do trellis work rather than focus on the vine is trellis work looks a lot more impressive. Like you can build a trellis like the Tower of Babel, right? You can build this massive infrastructure. You can build this massive edifice that people look at and they're excited about and they praise and they can say, man, look at that thing that you've built. And we do it too, don't we? Like, we're often more impressed when there's a certain number of people that attend an event rather than when someone overcomes a certain sin in their life. Like we're all prone to that, and I know I need to be reminded of that trellis work looks so much better, but sometimes we forget that the amazing things that God does is not in the things that look good, but in the things that look obscure and foolish. Many times he works when we do things not very well, to be quite honest. I know anyone that's preached, right? Like when you preached your worst sermon of your life, like you're just like walk off like, I think I'm done. like, God, I'm not called to this. And that's the sermon that everyone comes up to you and like, man, that God moved in my life. I confess sin. I've changed. I've come to faith. And you're like that one? Seriously? Like that one I did 2 weeks ago. I nailed that one, but not this one. But that's how it works, right? Let me tell you a story. This was a few years ago. And this was when we did this bi-weekly men's thing. It was in our church, very, very early days in our church. And I did some very poor planning, and I planned that one of our days fell on, it was like a holiday weekend for our men's group. And so on that day, one person came. One person. On the outside, you'd have been like, man, that was really bad, Eric. Let me tell you about what happened on that day. This one person I met with had just started coming to our church not very long. God was doing some things in their life, and they're asking some questions. And when that one person came on that day, we went out on the front porch. We sat down, and I actually diagrammed the gospel out. Showed, he gave it away. Yeah. Yeah. Diagram the gospel, and like now everyone, God came down. Like both of us had chills in that moment, and I won't he was working through some things in his life, and God was doing that, and like we had just started to get to know each other. And at that event, that on the outside the trellis looked like it was very poorly managed, God used that meeting to minister in Justin's life, amongst many other things, reveal himself more to him, and continue to change and transform him, which he eventually, he either was really sanctified or came to faith. We don't know the process, but he was changed. Now to this day, he's our lead missionary for our ministry that was birthed out of this church. And week in and week out, he preaches the gospel to hundreds of people. And is saving babies and taking the gospel there. Was that meeting a success? Yes. I think so. But on the outside, it didn't look like it was. But that's the vine work. The vine work often does not look as impressive. And here's the thing. Like, I wish I could stand up. I so wish I could stand up and tell you the stories that I've heard from so many people. It just so happens right now, most of them come back to me right now. And I wish I could stand up on Sunday and tell you, like, that person you're sitting next to, like they just overcame this huge sin in their life. It was massive. And I could tell you story after story. I mean, people wouldn't like that, so I don't do that. But if you could hear them all, you would be like, oh, wow, like God is so here. He is so moving. And so I'm like, well, since I can't do that, I guess the other thing that I can do is help others to be that person that gets to hear those stories from everyone else. And then you'll be like, yeah, like God is moving. And that's the vine work. But we have to have a ministry mind shift that doesn't make an idol out of the trellis and stand back and say, look at this amazing trellis that we have with no fruit bearing on it. I want us to be a church that, yes, we have to focus on the trellis, and some of us have to give more time to that and create systems and structures and those things. That stuff is all necessary, but with the intended goal that all of us will bear more fruit in our lives. That is what we want. So the first mind shift is that trellis work is necessary, but the vine work is what we're after. And here's another part of that. This is what this means, is that this mind shift that must take place is embracing the idea that ministry is to be done by the masses, by the multitude, not the few. Like starting a church and planning a church, like you're faced with these temptations. Like you have this heart of flesh, and you want things to grow. Like I hope no one ever take this. Like, I want our church to be as big as God will allow. I want as many disciples to be made as God will allow. And sometimes you're looking through that and you're like, man, like, what if we just did things like the other place? You know, what if we just did this? What if we just did that? Because there are churches out there that they make conscious choices because the end goal is just to get a certain number of people in seats, that they build their church around programs run by a few people. So a few people run these programs, and then the other people fit into these programs so they can spend their time serving in these programs to feel like they're accomplishing something. But when you get inside that and you start examining the vine, there's very little fruit that's bearing. And I'm like, I don't want that. Like, I don't want that. Like, I want a church. Like, I dream of a church community of which there's hundreds and thousands of people that their main focus is to tend the vine of their neighbor so that they would bear more fruit, and to have ministry done by the multitudes, not the few. And that's a mind shift that we want to have. So that's the first thing. If we want to tend to the vine, the ministry mind shift is that the vine is the important work, and attached to that is embracing the idea that the vine work is work that all of us are called to do. Every single one of us, we are called to tend to the vine work of those people in our lives. So let me bring that to the second thing. The second point then is that we must have a mind shift on our schedule. So you and I must continually have a mind shift on how we view our schedule and how we view our time. Theologically, what I mean is this, is that God created time. God is the author of time. God is the one who created the beginning and the end, and he created us to live in time. So God is the Lord of our time. And so what that means is that, one, you and I are not the Lord of our time. And number two, other people are not the Lord of our time. God and God alone is. What do I mean by that? sometimes we can control our time as if we are the one that created it, or we can allow others to control our time as if they created it. We don't want to fall into either one of those. What we want to fall into is to view our lives in this way, that time is God's gift to us, and he has made us stewards of it. He has called us to steward our time and to steward our time well for his sake. I have a handout. If you'll turn to the second page on this right now, just pass it around. Don't look at you can look at it, but primarily I want you to look at the second page, because I think this gives us a good picture of what God wants us to do with our time. So what you'll notice so you've got the first page has the front and back. Go to the one after that, which there's 59 verses there. These verses are known as the one another verses. So 59 times that we found them. There's most likely even more than that. But here's 59 times in the Bible that we read that God calls us to do something to another person, to one another. Love one another, serve one another, bear one another's burdens. And the point of all of that is this. God is the author of our time, so he's the one that communicates what we are to do with our time. And so a huge priority that all of us would have in our time, based off how many verses there are of this, is to spend time one anothering. All right? Spend our time one anothering. Which let me just say something on this. I know we've all been there and said things like this. Like, oftentimes we'll talk about, well, I don't need to be part of a church community to be a Christian. Theoretically, that statement is true. However, the first question I would ask is, so how then do you fulfill these 59 one another statements then? Like you and your wife, one anothering? Yeah. Yeah, I love you. I think it's broader than that, right? That's just one kind of side note of the importance of what he's communicating here. So God is the author of time. He's told us that within this time of various things, we are to serve one another. We are to contribute to one another. We are to be focused on one another. So with that, in order to serve one another and to fulfill these one another statements, we all need to have shifts on how we view our time and our personal schedules. Because here's the thing. Like, people slip through the cracks all the time. Like, people in our lives that we're missing that aren't getting one anothered. And they need to be one anothered, okay? If you remember anything else, just remember you got to one another, all right? If you forget everything else, that's what you need to do. And so what that means is I need to have a shift in my schedule. You need to have a shift in your schedule. One thing I need to personally have a mind shift, and other leaders, is that this call to one anothering is a call for the entire church body, not just me, not just another leader. Let me draw your attention to the first page. So this is a community activity. And there's different ways we can view ministry, and Lord willing, I hope that we can continue to grow and be the last one, which is a training church. But you have a chaplaincy church, a business church, or a training church. And in each of these different churches, there's different ways that they operate. So in a chaplaincy church, the pastor is the preacher and service provider. In the business church, they are the preacher and the manager. In a training church, the preacher and trainer. Sunday is, according to the chaplaincy, a service of worship. According to the business, an attractional meeting. According to a training church, is the gathering of worshiping disciples. Outside of Sunday, the chaplaincy church has occasional services. The business church has a range of events and programs. The training church has disciples reaching out to disciples. When it comes to pastoral care, the chaplaincy church has the pastor do counseling and visitation. The business church just runs small groups. The training church has people ministering to people. Let me insert this. I love small groups. Small groups don't disciple anyone. Right? People disciple people. Small groups is a vehicle to disciple people. But a small group in and of itself will disciple no one. It's just an event. But people disciple people. So I don't just want us to say our pastoral care is small groups. I want our pastoral care to be people ministering to people. Each and every one of us ministering to one another. A church is like a chaplaincy church, a small corner store. A business, a department store. Big infrastructure, big staff, a lot of variety, a lot of selections. A training church, a team with active coaches. The last one tends to result in a chaplaincy church, consumers in maintenance mode. That is, church is about me and my needs, and I'm just riding the wave. The second one is consumers in growth mode. It's church is about me and getting my needs met, but I want more people to be part of that. The last one, a training church, is disciples in mission mode. And my friends, I'm so thankful that there's a group of people that say, yeah, I signed up for that third one. I'm looking at them. And let's continue this. Let's not give up. Let's not lose heart. Let's not get weary in well-doing. Let's continue to press forward and to reach out to one another, to continue to disciple one another, to minister to one another, and to continue to be on mission. Because in order to bear fruit in the vine, we definitely have to change how we view our schedule. And I shared all that to say this because for me, what that means is I need to focus time on continuing to train others to minister to other people, to set the example to do that. I can only do it to so many people or any other leader. Like there's a cap of each of us as individuals. There's a cap to how much of the vine we can tend to. But if we have an army of people tending to the vine, and then multiple armies of people tending to the vine, fruit will continue to bear. And that is what I pray will continue to take place. So that's for us, viewing things different, even our structures that we're creating. How can we create these structures and these things to serve people more? Some things that we have done differently recently is you'll notice our partnership class. The goal of that is to get people around our community and get them to read good materials, to listen to our podcast, to get on board with the learning culture, and to connect them with a person that can minister to them, to connect them with a community, and to make them part of what we're doing. So we've put our everything we have on a podcast. We're doing the podcast so that we can teach information that we don't normally teach on Sunday that people can divulge and digest and then to share with other people. That's trellis work, but the goal of that is to bear more fruit on the vine. So as we as leaders have to continue to think of more things to do like that and to think through our time differently. As well as each and every one of us has to think through our time differently if we are to fulfill these one another statements. One thing is that we have to continue to put a high premium on training, which is what we're doing here. High premium on training. I love that sponge analogy, right? Like that sponge analogy is if we're continuing to use the sponge to clean things, eventually it's going to be out of water. If we're acting as a sponge and continuing to going out and to serve others, eventually we're going to get out of water. If we don't have a way to train and to grow ourselves, we're going to burn out. So continue to place a high premium on training. That's the first thing. Second thing is to begin to track the relationships that God has placed in our life. And this is one of the main things I want to talk about. So turn to this page. All right. Some of you might think this is weird. Like, I don't want to write someone's name down. This is what I've done from day. So you guys are like, I used to actually have this massive sheet on our wall. Now we've got other leaders and other people involved doing this, but I literally in my bedroom used to cover my entire wall. And I'd have a list of everyone who was a partner, and I'd write down who was like attending the church, if they were in groups, like if they had need, so I could pray for them. Like literally wrote it out on the wall. And I was thinking about this, and it's like, man, imagine if all of us were doing that with the relationships we have in our lives. And thinking through it, like, man, how can I minister to this person better? Now, this is not something you might not want to leave out on your counter, you know? People are like, man, I'm on there. I'm outreach? Dang it. However, it's yeah, I need training, I need growth, like, yeah. However, why do we count these things? Because people count. And this is just a guide for us to know how to pray for someone, to know us how to think through their life. So for the name, if you're married, your spouse goes here. If you have kids, write them on here. And then write out and think through, how can I minister to them? Like, many of us have kids that need outreach. Like, they don't know Jesus. Like, we're bringing the gospel to them. Write those people out. If you're a small group leader or a ministry leader, write those people out that God has put in your life. Write them out. Think through, man. Like, where are they at? What? How can I pray for them? How can I help minister to them? If you are a business owner or kind of an upper level manager, write your employees. Like, God has placed those people in your life to minister to. And then write people that that you know in your life that aren't Christians, that need the gospel. And then what that also does is you can look through your list and you can see, like, man, I spend all my time only with Christians. Or I spend none of my time with Christians. And we can think through how to balance our life and then how to better minister to people. And let me just say this, for anyone that's coming to ONElife Leadership Academy, we're going to start utilizing this more often in our group meetings to see how we can better minister to the people that God has entrusted in our care. I don't want one person to get missed. I want everyone to be served and cared for and loved. And the more people we have doing that, the less people will fall through the cracks. And then another thing I would say on this is, as you're thinking through this, this is where the church trellis, the church structures can help in this process. Okay, so for outreach, like one thing I can do is, I can share with them a podcast about our church, the intro to ONElife Church podcast, the very first one. Get them kind of to learn our culture, to hear them. I can invite them to church. They can hear the Bible presented, hear the gospel presented. I can plug them into a small group. You know, maybe they like that more intimate setting, but I can think through for my outreach how to leverage my relationships that I have. Or maybe it's finding a friend that you have or a couple of friends and having a cookout and inviting those people in. There's a variety of different ways we can do it, but if we look through it and we start thinking through it more, we'll know how to better minister to them. And let me just say this, something that has blessed me tremendously, Matt and Karina, since they have come to the church, I don't know if they write it out. I don't know if they do. You do, yeah. But they've done that. Like I've noticed, like I've seen them all the time. They're meeting with different people. They're talking with different people from here at the church, outside the church, and it's like, man, that's awesome. They're committed to ministering to one another. But the more we can get in a habit of writing this out and thinking it through, the better we're going to be able to serve one another. And then it's having a shift on our time, on our schedule, thinking through these things more, and then opening up our house and our lives and our hearts more often. And yes, we might miss some of our favorite TV episodes. I'm sorry. I don't know any other way to do this discipleship thing. I don't know any way to do it and catch all of your favorites. I just don't know how to do it. TiVo. What's that? You got to keep up on those, yeah. I'm not saying to not watch. I mean, enjoy all things. God has given us all things to richly enjoy, but sometimes we may miss those things. Sleep less, yeah. we may be tired. So listen to this quote. I read this recently. Like when we get really serious about discipling, I think this is probably one of the hardest burdens that comes with it. This is a quote, George Grant. I read from George Grant. He said, "The difficulty in ministering to people is dealing with the psychological burden of an unstructured life." Anyone get that? No? Let me read it again. The difficulty in ministering to people is dealing with the psychological burden of an unstructured life. Yes, because your life becomes unstructured. If you're an entrepreneur, you know what that's like, living with an unstructured life. But when you start ministering with people, because here's what happens. As you reach out and as you open your life to someone, you get a call at midnight, and you're tired, but they need you. There's a marriage problem that's on the rocks, and you wanted to relax that night, but you're like, I got to help them, or maybe it's another night. It becomes very, very unstructured because people in all of our lives are very, very unpredictable. And it's psychologically hard because in our flesh, we just want to go back to the routine. But when we start pouring into people, there's no routine because we're all messy, right? Like we're all sheep ministering to other sheep. Like we talk about elders or shepherd. I don't know, man. I'm a sheep. And I'm just trying to help a bunch of other, trying to help other sheep to the shepherd, which is Jesus. I've been reading the book Animal Farm, which I'd never read before. I don't know how I missed that. Yeah, I'd never read that before. So I just picked it up and I started reading it. And the one pig, if no one's ever read it, it's obviously fiction, and it's basically talks about how the animals overthrew the humans and they created their own little government and it ended up being worse. It was written by George Orwell, who also wrote 1984. And anyways, the one pig trained the sheep to just say, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. That's sheep, right? Bah. Like animals good, humans bad. That was as far as they could get and understand. Like that's us. We're sheep. And when we start to have an unstructured life in and of ourselves, it becomes psychologically hard. It becomes burdensome. But God has called us to love one another. So let me wrap it up by just saying this, is we want to continue to grow and be in a church that does the necessary trellis work, but in order for the fruit to bear on the vine. And a huge part of that is for us to have ministry mind shift, to know that God has called us all to minister. And the second thing is to know that time is not our own. And God has called us to be stewards of it and to invest that time into the lives of other people so that fruit can bear in their lives.